Michael Harrison disappeared on August 14, 2018, along with his 16-year-old son Jake, during a planned camping expedition in the Trinity Alps Wilderness of Northern California. The two had departed from their home in Redding 3 days earlier, with enough supplies for a week-long backcountry trip. According to family members, this was supposed to be a father-son bonding experience before Jake started his junior year of high school. Michael Harrison was 45 years old at the time of his disappearance. He worked as a civil engineer for the Shasta County Department of Public Works, a position he had held for nearly 12 years. Colleagues described him as reliable and methodical, someone who always showed up on time and completed his projects within deadline. His supervisor, Tom Brennan, told local news outlets that Michael had requested the time off months in advance and seemed excited about the trip. There were no issues at work, no conflicts with coworkers, and no indication of any professional stress that might have affected his state of mind before the expedition. Friends and neighbors in Redding knew Michael as an experienced outdoorsman. He had been hiking and camping in the Trinity Alps since his 20s, long before he married or had children. His wife, Linda Harrison, confirmed in later interviews that her husband knew the wilderness area well and had made similar trips at least a dozen times over the years. She said he was always careful about preparation and never took unnecessary risks. Michael owned proper gear, carried maps and a compass, and always filed trip plans with the family before leaving. Linda stated that she had no concerns when he and Jake departed that August morning. Jake Harrison was a sophomore at Shasta High School at the time. Teachers described him as a quiet but capable student who earned average grades and stayed out of trouble. He played on the junior varsity soccer team and had a small circle of close friends. According to his mother, Jake was not an avid outdoorsman like his father, but he had accompanied Michael on several shorter camping trips in previous years without incident. Linda Harrison said her son was looking forward to the trip, despite some initial reluctance about spending a full week without his phone or internet access. The Harrisons lived in a modest single-story house on the east side of Redding. Michael and Linda had been married for 18 years. In addition to Jake, they had a younger daughter named Emma, who was 12 at the time of the disappearance. Family friends described the Harrisons as a typical middle-class family, with no known financial problems or domestic issues. Linda worked part-time as a dental hygienist at a clinic downtown. Neighbors reported that the family kept to themselves, but were always polite and never caused any disturbances. In the weeks leading up to the trip, Michael had been planning the route carefully. According to Linda, he spread maps across the dining room table and marked potential campsites with a pencil. He told her they would hike into a less traveled section of the wilderness, away from the popular trails near the lakes. Michael wanted to show Jake what real backcountry camping felt like, away from crowds and day hikers. He purchased new batteries for their flashlights, restocked their first aid kit, and made a checklist of everything they needed to pack. Jake's friends later told investigators that he had mixed feelings about the trip. One classmate, David Ortiz, said Jake mentioned he would rather stay home and hang out during the last weeks of summer break, but he did not complain much. Another friend, Sarah Kim, recalled that Jake seemed neutral about the whole thing. He was not enthusiastic, but he was not dreading it either. Jake's social media activity in the days before departure showed nothing unusual. He posted a photo of his packed backpack on Instagram, with the caption "Going off the grid for a week," and a hiking emoji. On the morning of August 11, 2018, Michael and Jake loaded their gear into Michael's pickup truck and left Redding around 7 in the morning. Linda Harrison said goodbye to them in the driveway. She recalled that Michael kissed her and reminded her he would call when they got back to an area with cell service, which would likely be on August 18th or 19. Jake hugged his mother and younger sister before climbing into the passenger seat. Emma Harrison later told a family counselor that she remembered waving as the truck pulled away and thinking it was just another normal goodbye. The drive to the Trinity Alps trailhead took approximately 2 hours. Michael and Jake stopped at a gas station in Weaverville around 9 in the morning. Security footage from the station, later reviewed by investigators, showed both of them entering the convenience store. Michael purchased a coffee and a bag of trail mix. Jake bought a sports drink and used the restroom. The clerk on duty that day did not remember anything unusual about the interaction. The footage showed them leaving the store at 9:14 and driving north toward the mountains. They arrived at the Canyon Creek trailhead parking area around 10:30. A Forest Service log at the trailhead recorded their entry. Michael signed in with his name, the date, and his expected return date of August 18th. He noted that their destination was the Upper Canyon Creek Basin area. Other hikers who were at the trailhead that morning did not recall seeing Michael and Jake, but the parking lot was not crowded. August is a busy month in the Trinity Alps, but the Canyon Creek Trail is long and strenuous, which tends to discourage casual visitors. The hike from the trailhead to the Upper Basin area is approximately 8 miles and involves significant elevation gain. Michael and Jake were carrying multi-day packs with a tent, sleeping bags, food, water filtration equipment, clothing, and other camping supplies. According to the gear list that Michael left with Linda, they had enough provisions for 7 days. He also carried a handheld GPS device, a map, a compass, a whistle, a knife, waterproof matches, and a small emergency kit. Jake carried his own backpack with his personal items and some of the shared food supplies. No one reported seeing Michael and Jake on the trail that day. The few hikers who were in the area during that time period were interviewed later, but none remembered encountering a father and son matching their descriptions. This was not unusual given the length and difficulty of the trail. Many backpackers move at different paces and camp in different locations, so it is common to go hours or even days without seeing another person in the backcountry. Michael had planned to set up their base camp somewhere in the Upper Canyon Creek drainage, near the granite cliffs and alpine meadows that characterize the high country of the Trinity Alps. According to the route description he left with his wife, they intended to spend several days exploring the surrounding ridges and possibly attempting a scramble up one of the nearby peaks. Michael was familiar with the area and had camped there before, though not in recent years. Back in Redding, Linda Harrison went about her normal routine. She worked her scheduled shifts at the dental clinic and took care of Emma. She did not expect to hear from her husband and son until they returned. Michael had made it clear before leaving that there would be no cell phone service in the backcountry and that she should not worry if she did not hear from him for a week. This was standard procedure for their family whenever Michael went on wilderness trips. August 18th came and went with no word from Michael or Jake. Linda was not immediately concerned. She knew that plans could change in the backcountry due to weather, trail conditions, or simply the desire to stay an extra day or two. She told investigators later that she started to feel uneasy on August 19th, when there was still no contact. By the evening of August 20th, she was worried enough to call the Shasta County Sheriff's Office. The initial missing person report was filed on the evening of August 20th, 2018. Linda provided the dispatcher with all the information she had, including the trailhead location, the expected return date, and a description of the gear Michael and Jake were carrying. The dispatcher assured her that the sheriff's office would coordinate with the Trinity County Sheriff and the Forest Service to initiate a search. Because Michael and Jake were overdue by only 2 days at that point, and because experienced backpackers sometimes extend their trips, the initial response was measured rather than urgent. On the morning of August 21st, a 2-person team from the Trinity County Search and Rescue Unit hiked into the Canyon Creek area to begin looking for Michael and Jake. The team included a search coordinator and a volunteer with extensive backcountry experience. They followed the same trail that Michael and Jake would have taken and began checking campsites in the Upper Basin area, where Michael had indicated he planned to stay. The search team located Michael and Jake's campsite on the afternoon of August 21st. The site was approximately 9 miles from the trailhead, situated near a small creek in a flat area surrounded by pine trees and granite outcroppings. The tent was still standing and properly staked. Inside the tent, investigators found 2 sleeping bags laid out neatly, personal clothing items, a camping stove, cookware, and food supplies. Michael's backpack was inside the tent along with Jake's. Both packs appeared to be mostly unpacked, suggesting that Michael and Jake had been at the site for at least a day or two. Outside the tent, the search team observed a fire ring with partially burned wood and ash. A water filtration system was hanging from a tree branch near the creek. 2 pairs of hiking boots were placed outside the tent entrance, which is common practice among campers to keep dirt out of the sleeping area. The campsite was organized and showed no signs of hurry or distress. Nothing appeared to be missing or out of place. What was missing were Michael and Jake themselves. The search team called out their names repeatedly and searched the immediate area around the campsite. They found no response and no trace of where the 2 might have gone. The team radioed their findings back to the command center, and additional resources were mobilized. By the evening of August 21st, a larger search operation was underway. Over the next several days, dozens of search and rescue personnel combed the area around the campsite. Teams included volunteers from multiple counties, Forest Service rangers, and a California Highway Patrol helicopter. Searchers checked nearby ridges, valleys, creek drainages, and potential routes that Michael and Jake might have taken for a day hike. They looked for footprints, discarded items, or any indication of where the two had gone after leaving their camp. The terrain in the upper Trinity Alps is rugged and unforgiving. Granite cliffs rise steeply from narrow valleys, and dense forest covers much of the lower elevations. Creek beds are choked with boulders and fallen timber. Visibility is often limited to a few dozen feet in the thickest sections of forest. Search dogs were brought in to try to pick up a scent trail, but the dogs found nothing conclusive beyond the immediate campsite area. Linda Harrison drove to the Trailhead Command Post on August 22nd to speak with search coordinators. She brought recent photos of Michael and Jake, along with dental records and additional information that might help identify them if they were located. In interviews with local news crews, Linda appeared exhausted and frightened. She repeated that her husband was experienced and careful, and that she could not understand how both he and Jake could simply vanish without leaving any clue. She appealed to anyone in the area to report anything unusual they might have seen. Jake's friends organized a social media campaign to spread awareness about the disappearance. Posters with photos of Michael and Jake were shared thousands of times on platforms like Facebook and Instagram. The hashtag #FindMichaelAndJake began trending locally. Emma Harrison, Jake's younger sister, stayed home with relatives during the search effort. According to family members, she was deeply shaken by the situation and struggled to understand why her father and brother had not come home. Investigators interviewed everyone who had been in the Trinity Alps area during the relevant time period. Trailhead logs were reviewed, and hikers who had signed in during the same week were contacted. A few people recalled seeing a man and a teenage boy on the trail, but none of the sightings could be definitively confirmed as Michael and Jake. No one reported hearing calls for help, seeing anything suspicious, or noticing any unusual activity in the backcountry. One hiker, a woman named Rebecca Lawson from Sacramento, told investigators that she had camped about 2 miles downstream from where Michael and Jake's site was later found. She said she heard voices in the distance on the evening of August 13th, but could not make out what was being said. She assumed it was other campers and thought nothing of it. Rebecca hiked out on August 14th and did not learn about the disappearance until weeks later, when she saw a news report. The official search continued for 12 days before being scaled back. By early September, the active ground search was called off due to diminishing probability of finding Michael and Jake alive in the wilderness. Search coordinators stated that they had covered all reasonable areas multiple times and had found no evidence of where the two had gone or what might have happened to them. The case remained open, but without new leads, there was little more that could be done. Linda Harrison refused to give up hope. She hired a private investigator and continued to distribute flyers throughout Northern California. She gave interviews to regional and national media outlets, hoping that someone, somewhere, might have information. Michael's co-workers organized fundraisers to help cover search costs and support the family financially. The community of Redding rallied around the Harrisons, but as weeks turned into months with no developments, public attention began to fade. The disappearance of Michael and Jake Harrison was officially classified as a cold case by the end of 2018. Investigators had no evidence of foul play, no reason to suspect that Michael had planned to disappear voluntarily, and no explanation for why an experienced hiker and his son would leave a secure campsite and vanish without a trace. The case file remained open, but with no new information coming in, it was placed in a backlog alongside hundreds of other unsolved missing person cases across California. The Harrison family expected Michael and Jake to return home by August 18, 2018, but when that date passed without any contact, Linda Harrison began to feel the first traces of concern. She told investigators later that she tried to remain calm on August 19th, reminding herself that her husband was experienced and that delays in the backcountry were not uncommon. Weather conditions could change plans, trails could become impassable, or equipment could fail, causing a trip to extend by a day or two. Linda occupied herself with work and caring for her daughter Emma, But by the evening of August 20th, her worry had grown into something she could no longer ignore. Linda called the Shasta County Sheriff's Office at approximately 7:30 on the evening of August 20th. She spoke with a dispatcher and explained that her husband and son were overdue from a camping trip in the Trinity Alps. The dispatcher asked for details including the trailhead location, the planned route, physical descriptions of Michael and Jake, and what they were wearing when they left. Linda provided everything she could remember. Michael had been wearing a blue synthetic hiking shirt, dark gray convertible pants, and tan hiking boots. Jake had worn a red long-sleeve athletic shirt, black shorts, and gray hiking boots. Both were carrying large backpacks, a green tent, and other standard camping gear. The dispatcher assured Linda that the information would be forwarded to the appropriate agencies, and that a search would be initiated the following morning. Linda hung up the phone feeling slightly relieved that official action was being taken, but also deeply unsettled by the reality that something might be seriously wrong. She called her sister Margaret, who lived in Sacramento, and told her what was happening. Margaret offered to drive up to Redding immediately, but Linda said she would wait until morning to see what the search teams discovered. That night, Linda barely slept. She lay awake in bed replaying the last conversation she had with Michael before he left. He had been cheerful and relaxed, talking about the route he planned to take and the places he wanted to show Jake. There had been no indication that anything was troubling him. He had kissed her goodbye in the driveway, loaded the truck, and driven away like he had done many times before. Linda searched her memory for anything unusual, any sign she might have missed, but found nothing. On the morning of August 21st, Trinity County Search and Rescue dispatched a team to the Canyon Creek trailhead. The team consisted of 2 experienced members, Greg Sullivan and Maria Ortega, both of whom had been involved in dozens of backcountry rescues over the years. They began hiking into the wilderness at approximately 8 in the morning, carrying radio equipment, GPS devices, medical supplies, and enough provisions for a multi-day search if necessary. Greg Sullivan later described the hike to reporters as routine at first. The weather was clear and warm, typical for late August in Northern California. The trail was well maintained in the lower sections, though it became steeper and rockier as they gained elevation. They made steady progress and reached the upper Canyon Creek Basin by early afternoon. They began checking potential campsites in the area, where Michael had indicated he planned to stay. At approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, Sullivan and Ortega located a tent in a flat clearing near a creek. The tent was green, matching the description Linda had provided. The site was tucked into a grove of pine trees with a clear view of the surrounding granite peaks. Sullivan called out Michael's name several times, then Jake's. There was no response. The forest was silent except for the sound of the creek and the occasional bird call. The search team approached the tent cautiously. The entrance flap was closed, but not zipped. Sullivan opened it and looked inside. He saw 2 sleeping bags, backpacks, clothing, a camping stove, food containers, and other personal items. Everything was neatly arranged. There were no signs of struggle or panic. Sullivan called out again, louder this time in case Michael and Jake were nearby and simply out of earshot. Still no response. Outside the tent, the team observed a fire ring with ash and partially burned wood. 2 pairs of hiking boots were placed side by side near the tent entrance. A water filtration system hung from a low branch over the creek. A length of paracord was tied between 2 trees, likely used for drying clothes or hanging gear. The campsite looked exactly like what would be expected from an experienced camper settling in for several days. Maria Ortega radioed the command center and reported their findings. She described the location, the condition of the campsite, and the absence of Michael and Jake. The incident commander, a veteran search coordinator named David Reese, instructed them to secure the area and conduct a preliminary search of the immediate surroundings, while additional teams were mobilized. Sullivan and Ortega spent the next 2 hours searching the area within a quarter-mile radius of the campsite. They walked along the creek in both directions, checked nearby ridges and rock formations, and looked for any trails or footprints that might indicate where Michael and Jake had gone. They found nothing. No tracks, no discarded items, no clothing, no signs of disturbance. It was as if the 2 had simply stepped away from their camp and disappeared. Back in Redding, Linda Harrison received a phone call from the Trinity County Sheriff's Office at approximately 4:30 in the afternoon. A deputy informed her that the search team had located Michael and Jake's campsite, but had not found Michael or Jake themselves. The deputy explained that additional resources were being brought in and that a larger search operation would begin immediately. Linda felt her stomach drop. She called her sister Margaret, who left Sacramento within the hour and arrived in Redding by early evening. By the morning of August 22nd, more than 30 search and rescue personnel were deployed in the Trinity Alps. Teams came from Trinity County, Shasta County, and neighboring jurisdictions. The California Highway Patrol provided a helicopter to conduct aerial searches of the surrounding area. Volunteers with tracking dogs arrived to see if they could pick up a scent trail. The operation was coordinated from a command post set up at the Canyon Creek Trailhead parking area. Linda Harrison drove to the command post with her sister Margaret on the morning of August 22nd. She brought recent photographs of Michael and Jake, copies of their dental records, and detailed descriptions of the clothing and gear they had taken. She met with Incident Commander David Reese, who explained that the search was being conducted systematically and that every possible avenue was being explored. Reese told Linda that the condition of the campsite suggested Michael and Jake had been there for at least a day or two before disappearing, but that there were no clues about where they had gone or why. Linda asked if there was any possibility they had gotten lost on a day hike. Reese said it was possible, but that Michael's experience level and the fact that they had left their GPS device, map, and compass at the campsite made that scenario less likely. Linda asked if there could have been an accident. Reese acknowledged that falls, injuries, or sudden medical emergencies were always possibilities in the backcountry, but that search teams were checking all the areas where such incidents might have occurred. Television news crews began arriving at the trailhead on August 22nd. Local stations from Redding, Chico, and Sacramento sent reporters to cover the story. Linda agreed to speak on camera, hoping that publicity might generate leads. Standing in front of the command post tent with Margaret beside her, Linda addressed the cameras with a trembling voice. She described Michael as a loving father and an experienced outdoorsman who would never take unnecessary risks. She described Jake as a good kid who was excited about starting his junior year of high school. She appealed to anyone with information to contact authorities immediately. The interviews aired on the evening news across Northern California. The story was also picked up by regional newspapers and shared on social media. Hundreds of people in the Redding area changed their profile pictures to photos of Michael and Jake with the caption, "Bring them home." A Facebook group called Find Michael and Jake Harrison was created and quickly gained thousands of members. People posted prayers, shared the news coverage, and organized volunteer efforts to help with the search. Emma Harrison, who was 12 years old, stayed home with relatives while her mother was at the command post. Family friends later said that Emma was confused and frightened by the situation. She asked repeatedly when her father and brother were coming home. Linda's sister Margaret took on the responsibility of caring for Emma and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy in the household, though everyone knew nothing was normal anymore. Search teams continued their work throughout August 22nd and 23. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the wilderness area, using binoculars and thermal imaging cameras to scan the terrain below. Ground teams hiked to remote valleys, ridges, and drainages, calling out names and blowing whistles. The tracking dogs were brought to the campsite and encouraged to pick up a scent, but the dogs showed interest only in the immediate area around the tent and then lost the trail. Handlers said this could mean that Michael and Jake had not walked away from the camp, or that environmental factors like wind and time had erased the scent trail. One theory that investigators considered was that Michael and Jake had gone for a short walk and become disoriented. However, this theory was problematic because the campsite was in a distinctive location near a creek with clear landmarks. An experienced hiker like Michael would have been able to navigate back easily, especially since the tent and gear were still visible. Additionally, both of their backpacks, containing essential items like water bottles, rain gear, and emergency supplies, were still in the tent. It seemed unlikely that either of them would have walked away from camp without taking basic provisions. Another theory was that they had encountered wildlife. Black bears are present in the Trinity Alps, and while attacks on humans are rare, they do occur. However, there were no signs of animal activity at the campsite. The food supplies were still intact and properly stored. There were no tracks, scat, or other indications that a bear or mountain lion had been in the area. Search teams checked for any signs of a struggle or evidence that might suggest a wildlife encounter, but found nothing. On August 24th, the search expanded to include more remote areas several miles from the campsite. Teams checked high ridges, cliff faces, talus fields, and dense forest sections where someone might have fallen or become trapped. Technical rescue specialists with climbing equipment were brought in to search steep terrain that was inaccessible to regular ground teams. The helicopter continued to fly reconnaissance missions whenever weather permitted. Michael's co-workers at the Shasta County Department of Public Works organized a fundraiser to help cover the costs associated with the search and to support Linda and Emma financially. They set up a donation page online and raised several $1,000s within the first few days. Local businesses in Redding contributed gift cards, meals, and other forms of assistance to the family. The outpouring of community support was overwhelming, but it did little to ease Linda's growing dread. Jake's friends from Shasta High School held a vigil in front of the school on the evening of August 25th. More than 100 students, teachers, and parents gathered with candles and signs. They sang songs, shared memories of Jake, and prayed for his safe return. Jake's soccer coach, Brian Matthews, spoke about Jake's dedication to the team and his quiet but positive presence. Several of Jake's classmates broke down crying. The vigil was covered by local news, and footage of the candlelight gathering was shared widely on social media. Linda returned to the command post every day, hoping for updates. On August 26th, David Reese sat down with her and explained that the active search phase was reaching the limits of what could reasonably be accomplished. Dozens of personnel had covered hundreds of square miles over 6 days. They had checked every logical area and many illogical ones. There was no evidence of where Michael and Jake had gone, no signs of distress, and no indication of what might have happened to them. Reese said the search would continue, but that it would transition from an active rescue mission to a more limited investigation and patrol effort. Linda felt her world collapsing. She asked Reese what she was supposed to do now. He told her that the case would remain open and that any new information would be investigated immediately. He encouraged her to continue publicizing the case and reaching out to media outlets. He also suggested that she consider hiring a private investigator if she had the resources, as private investigators sometimes have more flexibility to pursue leads than official agencies. On August 28th, the California Highway Patrol helicopter conducted a final aerial sweep of the region. The pilot and observer reported seeing nothing unusual. The ground teams were gradually pulled back, and by September 1st, the active search operation was officially suspended. A few personnel remained in the area to patrol and check for any new developments, but the large-scale coordinated effort had ended. Linda refused to accept that the search was over. She contacted a private investigator named Robert Chen, who specialized in missing person cases. Chen agreed to take the case and began conducting his own interviews and field work. He reviewed all the official reports, spoke with search and rescue personnel, and hiked into the Trinity Alps himself to examine the campsite and surrounding areas. After several weeks of investigation, Chen told Linda that he had found no new evidence. Everything pointed to a mystery with no clear explanation. The local media continued to cover the story sporadically throughout September and October. Linda appeared on a regional talk show to discuss the case and plead for information. She distributed flyers with Michael and Jake's photos at trailheads, campgrounds, and outdoor recreation areas throughout Northern California. She contacted national missing person organizations and submitted the case to databases and clearinghouses. Despite all these efforts, no credible leads emerged. By the end of 2018, the case had gone cold. The Trinity County Sheriff's Office maintained an open file, but with no evidence of foul play, no suspects, and no reasonable leads to follow, there was little active investigation taking place. Michael and Jake Harrison had simply vanished from their campsite in the Trinity Alps, leaving behind all their gear and no explanation. Linda struggled to maintain any sense of normal life. She continued working part-time at the dental clinic, but her focus was elsewhere. She spent hours every day searching online forums, reading about other missing person cases, and trying to find any pattern or clue that might help explain what happened. Her sister Margaret stayed in Redding for several months to help with Emma and provide emotional support. Emma returned to school in the fall, but teachers reported that she was withdrawn and struggling academically. She had difficulty concentrating and often asked to leave class to see the school counselor. Linda enrolled both herself and Emma in therapy to help them cope with the trauma and uncertainty of not knowing what had happened to Michael and Jake. In November 2018, Linda organized a memorial event at a local park in Reading. Even though Michael and Jake had not been officially declared deceased, hundreds of people attended. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, and strangers who had followed the story came to show support. Photos of Michael and Jake were displayed on poster boards. People shared stories and memories. Linda spoke briefly, thanking everyone for their support and expressing her hope that somehow, someday, she would learn the truth about what happened to her husband and son. The first anniversary of the disappearance came and went in August 2019. Linda returned to the Trinity Alps with a small group of family members and friends. They hiked to the campsite where Michael and Jake had last been seen and left flowers and a small stone marker. The wilderness was quiet and indifferent. The creek flowed past the clearing just as it had a year earlier. There were no answers to be found. By 2020, public attention had almost entirely faded. The case was no longer mentioned in the news. The social media groups dedicated to finding Michael and Jake became inactive. Linda continued to hold out hope, but she also had to find a way to move forward with her life. She reduced her hours at work and spent more time with Emma, trying to rebuild some sense of stability for her daughter. The Harrison home in Reading felt emptier than ever. Michael's engineering book still sat on the shelf in the den. Jake's soccer trophies gathered dust on his bedroom dresser. Linda could not bring herself to pack away their belongings. She left everything as it had been, as if keeping their rooms intact might somehow bring them back. As 2021 turned into 2022, Linda resigned herself to the possibility that she might never know what happened. She had exhausted every avenue, contacted every possible resource, and followed every lead, no matter how unlikely. The Trinity Alps had swallowed her husband and son without leaving a single clue, and the world had moved on. The case file sat in a cabinet at the Trinity County Sheriff's Office, gathering dust alongside hundreds of other unsolved disappearances. Then, in June of 2022, nearly 4 years after Michael and Jake vanished, something changed. A filmmaker named Derek Chen was using a drone to capture footage of the Trinity Alps Wilderness for a documentary project. When he reviewed the high-resolution video later that evening, he noticed something in the frame that made his hands go cold. It was something that should not have been there, something impossible to explain. Derek sat at his computer, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He rewound the footage and watched it again, then a third time. His heart was pounding. He reached for his phone to call the authorities, knowing that what he had just discovered was about to reopen a case that everyone had assumed was closed forever. Chapter 3. Cracks in Reality. Derek Chen was a 32-year-old independent filmmaker from San Francisco who specialized in nature documentaries. In early June 2022, he traveled to the Trinity Alps to capture aerial footage for a project about California wilderness areas. Derek had invested in a high-end consumer drone capable of recording in 4K resolution and flying for extended periods. He spent 3 days in the region, launching the drone from various locations to film the granite peaks, alpine lakes, and dense forests that characterize the area. On June 7th, Derek set up his equipment near the Canyon Creek drainage. He programmed the drone to fly a grid pattern over a remote section of wilderness approximately 3 miles from the main trail. The drone climbed to an altitude of 400 feet and began its automated flight path. Derek monitored the live feed on his controller screen but did not notice anything unusual during the flight. The footage showed typical backcountry scenery: trees, rocks, creeks, and ridgelines stretching into the distance. That evening, Derek returned to his hotel in Weaverville and began reviewing the day's footage on his laptop. He watched the files in sequence, scrubbing through the video to identify the best shots for his documentary. Most of the footage was unremarkable. Then, at approximately timestamp 23 minutes and 40 seconds into one file, Derek paused. He leaned closer to the screen. Something in the frame had caught his attention. The drone had been flying over a steep forested hillside dotted with large pine trees. In the center of the frame, one tree stood slightly taller than the others. Hanging from a branch near the top of that tree, approximately 15 feet above the ground, was what appeared to be a red object. Derek zoomed in on the image. The resolution was sharp enough to see details. It was a backpack, a red backpack, dangling from a branch far too high for anyone to reach without climbing equipment. Derek felt a chill run through him. He zoomed out and examined the surrounding area. Directly below the tree, on the forest floor, he noticed something else. He zoomed in again. There, arranged neatly on the ground, were two hiking boots. They were placed side by side, perfectly aligned, as if someone had carefully positioned them. Derek zoomed in further and saw that the boots were not empty. There appeared to be fabric inside them, possibly socks. Derek sat back from his laptop, his mind racing. He had not heard about the Harrison case. He was not from the area and had no knowledge of the disappearance that had occurred nearly 4 years earlier. But even without that context, what he was looking at made no sense. How does a backpack end up hanging 15 feet high in a tree in the middle of nowhere? Why would boots be arranged so deliberately on the ground beneath it? Derek took screenshots of the footage and marked the GPS coordinates that the drone had recorded. The location was remote, far from any established trails or campsites. It was an area that would be extremely difficult to access on foot due to the steep terrain and dense vegetation. Derek considered his options. He could ignore what he had found and move on with his project, or he could report it to authorities and potentially become involved in something complicated. After an hour of internal debate, Derek decided he had to report it. If someone was in trouble, or if this was evidence of something serious, he could not simply walk away. He searched online for the Trinity County Sheriff's Office contact information and found a non-emergency number. He called and was connected to a dispatcher. Derek explained that he was a filmmaker who had been using a drone in the Trinity Alps and had captured footage of something unusual. He described the red backpack and the boots. The dispatcher asked for his contact information and said someone would follow up. The next morning, Derek received a call from a detective named Lisa Ramirez with the Trinity County Sheriff's Office. She asked Derek to describe what he had seen in detail and to provide the exact GPS coordinates. Derek sent her the screenshots and the raw video file. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Detective Ramirez asked Derek if he had heard about the Harrison case. Derek said he had not. Ramirez explained that in August 2018, a father and son named Michael and Jake Harrison had disappeared while camping in the Trinity Alps. Their campsite had been found intact, but they had vanished without a trace. An extensive search had been conducted with no results. The case had gone cold. Now, nearly 4 years later, Derek's drone footage might be the first real evidence of what happened to them. Derek felt his stomach tighten. He asked if the red backpack could belong to Jake Harrison. Ramirez said that according to the case file, Jake had been carrying a red backpack when he disappeared. She told Derek that investigators would need to go to the location and examine the scene in person. She asked if Derek would be willing to meet with them and provide any additional information or assistance. Derek agreed. On June 9th, a team consisting of Detective Ramirez, 2 deputies, and a search and rescue coordinator hiked into the area where Derek's drone had captured the footage. Derek accompanied them, carrying his drone and controller in case they needed additional aerial views. The hike took nearly 4 hours due to the rough terrain. They used the GPS coordinates to navigate to the exact location. When they arrived, they found the tree. It was a large ponderosa pine standing on a steep slope covered with loose rock and thick underbrush. High up in the branches, clearly visible against the sky, was the red backpack. It hung from a branch approximately 15 feet above the ground, caught on a smaller limb. Below, on the forest floor, were the 2 hiking boots. They were positioned side by side, neat and deliberate, just as they had appeared in the drone footage. Detective Ramirez approached the boots carefully, taking photographs from multiple angles before touching anything. She knelt down and examined them closely. The boots were weathered and dirty, consistent with having been exposed to the elements for years. Inside each boot was a sock, still tucked into place as if someone had simply stepped out of them. The search and rescue coordinator, a man named Tom Harding, looked up at the backpack. He said there was no way it had ended up there naturally. A falling object would not catch on a branch that high and remain in place for 4 years. Someone or something had placed it there, though how and why remained a complete mystery. One of the deputies used a long pole with a hook to retrieve the backpack. It took several attempts, but eventually, the backpack came loose and fell to the ground. Ramirez opened it carefully. Inside were personal items: a water bottle, a rain jacket, a notebook, a pen, some energy bars, and a wallet. The wallet contained a learner's permit with Jake Harrison's name and photo. Ramirez stood up and looked around the site. They were approximately 3 miles from where Michael and Jake's campsite had been found in 2018. The terrain between the two locations was extremely rugged. There was no trail, no obvious route, and no reason anyone would have been in this specific spot. She radioed back to the command center and reported that they had confirmed the items belonged to Jake Harrison. Over the next several hours, the team conducted a thorough search of the surrounding area. They looked for any other evidence, any signs of what might have happened. They found nothing else. No clothing, no gear, no remains. Just the backpack in the tree and the boots on the ground. Tom Harding examined the tree itself, looking for any indication of how the backpack had been placed. There were no climbing marks on the bark, no rope burns on the branches, no equipment left behind. The branch that held the backpack was thin and would not have supported the weight of a person. It was as if the backpack had been thrown or placed there by something tall enough to reach that height, but nothing in the forest matched that description. The boots were even more puzzling. They had been placed deliberately, with care. They were not scattered or dropped. They were aligned perfectly, facing the same direction. The socks inside suggested that someone had removed them intentionally, perhaps to let them dry or because they were uncomfortable. But why leave them arranged so precisely on the forest floor, in such a remote location? Derek stood at the edge of the scene, filming the investigation with a handheld camera. He felt a deep unease. What had started as a simple documentary project had turned into something far more disturbing. He wondered if he should have just deleted the footage and moved on. But it was too late now. The discovery had been made, and the case that everyone thought was closed had just been torn wide open. Detective Ramirez placed the backpack and boots into evidence bags. She told the team they would need to bring in forensic specialists and possibly cadaver dogs to search the area more thoroughly. She also said that Linda Harrison would need to be notified immediately. After 4 years of silence, the family was about to receive news that would answer some questions, but raise many more. As the team prepared to hike back out, Derek looked up at the tree one more time. The branch where the backpack had hung swayed gently in the wind. The forest around them was silent except for the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird. Whatever had happened here remained a mystery, but now at least there was evidence. Now there was something to investigate. Now there was a thread to pull, even if no one knew where it might lead. Linda Harrison received the phone call from Detective Lisa Ramirez on the evening of June 9, 2022. She was at home with Emma, preparing dinner, when her phone rang. Ramirez identified herself and asked if Linda could speak privately. Linda's heart began to race. She stepped into the bedroom and closed the door. Ramirez explained that new evidence had been discovered in the Trinity Alps related to Michael and Jake's disappearance. Linda gripped the phone tightly and asked what had been found. Ramirez told her about Derek Chen's drone footage, the red backpack hanging in the tree and the hiking boots arranged on the ground. She said the backpack had been positively identified as belonging to Jake based on the contents, including his learner's permit. Linda felt her legs weaken. She sat down on the edge of the bed and asked if there was any sign of Jake or Michael themselves. Ramirez said no, only the items had been recovered. The following day, Linda drove to the Trinity County Sheriff's Office to meet with investigators. She was shown photographs of the scene and the recovered items. She confirmed that the backpack was Jake's. She recognized the boots as the ones Michael had been wearing when they left. Seeing these objects after 4 years brought a flood of emotions. Linda broke down crying in the interview room. Her sister Margaret, who had accompanied her, put an arm around her shoulders. Detective Ramirez explained that the discovery raised more questions than it answered. The location where the items were found was nearly 3 miles from the original campsite, in an area that was extremely difficult to access. There was no clear path or reason for Michael and Jake to have been there. The positioning of the items, particularly the boots and the backpack in the tree, suggested they had been placed deliberately, but by whom and why remained unknown. On June 11th, a specialized team returned to the site with cadaver dogs and forensic equipment. The dogs were trained to detect human remains, even those that had been buried or decomposed significantly. The handlers worked the dogs through the area in a systematic grid pattern, covering several hundred yards in all directions, from where the items had been found. After 6 hours of searching, the dogs showed interest in one small area, approximately 50 feet downslope from the tree. Investigators carefully excavated the spot where the dogs had alerted. They found fragments of fabric buried a few inches below the surface. The fabric appeared to be consistent with outdoor clothing, but it was too degraded to determine definitively what garment it had come from. The fragments were collected and sent to a forensic laboratory for analysis. In addition to the fabric, investigators found a small piece of synthetic material that might have been part of a backpack strap or tent component. No human remains were discovered despite the extensive search. The cadaver dogs indicated possible sites, but excavation revealed only animal bones, likely from deer or smaller wildlife. The forensic team used metal detectors to scan for any additional items like knives, belt buckles, or zippers that might have survived decomposition, but nothing significant was found. A forensic anthropologist named Dr. Patricia Moore was consulted to assess the scene. She reviewed the photographs, the location data, and the evidence collected. Dr. Moore noted that the remote and rugged terrain made it unlikely that the bodies would ever be recovered, even if they were in the vicinity. The forest floor was covered with thick layers of decomposing vegetation, and scavenger activity over 4 years would have scattered and broken down any remains. She stated that without more substantial evidence, it would be nearly impossible to determine what had happened to Michael and Jake. The fabric fragments were analyzed at the State Forensic Laboratory. DNA testing was conducted, but the samples were too degraded to produce usable profiles. The laboratory confirmed that the material was consistent with modern synthetic outdoor clothing, but could not definitively link it to either Michael or Jake. The results were inconclusive. Detective Ramirez interviewed Derek Chen multiple times to establish a timeline and verify the authenticity of the drone footage. Derek provided all the raw files, metadata, and GPS logs from the drone. Forensic analysts examined the footage to ensure it had not been manipulated or altered. They concluded that the video was genuine and that the items had been in place when the drone captured them on June 7, 2022. Investigators developed several theories about what might have happened. One possibility was that Michael and Jake had left their campsite for a day hike, become disoriented, and wandered into the remote area where the items were found. However, this theory did not explain why they would have left essential gear behind at the campsite, or how Jake's backpack ended up 15 feet high in a tree. Another theory was that they had encountered someone else in the wilderness, possibly someone with bad intentions. The Trinity Alps are remote, but not entirely uninhabited. Illegal activities such as marijuana cultivation had been documented in the area in past years, and encounters between hikers and individuals involved in such operations had occasionally turned dangerous. However, there was no evidence of foul play, no witnesses, and no reports of suspicious activity in the region during August 2018. A third theory, suggested by some search and rescue experts, was that Michael or Jake had suffered a medical emergency or accident, and the surviving person had tried to signal for help by placing items in visible locations. The backpack in the tree might have been an attempt to create a marker that could be seen from the air. The boots on the ground might have been left as a trail marker. However, this theory did not explain why no other distress signals were found, or why the person who placed the items did not return to the campsite or make their way back to the trailhead. Tom Harding, the search and rescue coordinator, reviewed the case extensively. He told reporters that in his 25 years of experience, he had never encountered anything quite like this. The deliberate arrangement of the items suggested intentional placement, but the context made no sense. Harding stated that the wilderness can be unforgiving and unpredictable, and that sometimes people make decisions under stress that seem irrational in hindsight. Linda Harrison gave an interview to a regional news station in late June. She sat in her living room with photos of Michael and Jake on the table beside her. She spoke slowly and carefully, her voice steady but strained. She said she was grateful that something had finally been found, but that the discovery brought more pain than closure. She did not understand how her husband's boots and her son's backpack could be in such a remote location, arranged in such a strange manner, with no other trace of them. The story received renewed media attention across California. National news outlets picked up the case, and it was featured on several true crime podcasts and online forums. People speculated endlessly about what might have happened. Some suggested explanations involving criminal activity. Others pointed to the possibility of a tragic accident followed by scavenger activity, and a few proposed more far-fetched scenarios that investigators dismissed as implausible. Emma Harrison, now 16 years old, struggled with the renewed attention. She had spent the past 4 years trying to build a life without her father and brother, and the sudden resurgence of the case reopened old wounds. She told her mother she did not want to be involved in any media interviews or public discussions about the case. Linda respected her daughter's wishes and did her best to shield her from the spotlight. By the end of summer 2022, the investigation had reached another standstill. All leads had been followed, all forensic tests had been completed, and no new evidence had emerged. The Trinity County Sheriff's Office released a statement saying that the case remained open and active, but that without additional information, there was little more they could do. They encouraged anyone with knowledge about the case to come forward. Derek Chen completed his documentary about the California wilderness, but he did not include footage of the discovery. He told interviewers that it felt wrong to turn a family's tragedy into entertainment content. He said the experience had changed him and made him more aware of the fragility of life in remote places. Derek donated a portion of the proceeds from his film to a nonprofit organization that supports families of missing persons. Linda Harrison continues to live in Redding with Emma. She has not packed away Michael and Jake's belongings. Their rooms remain as they were in August 2018. Linda keeps the case alive by updating the family's website and social media pages, hoping that someone, somewhere, might have information that could finally bring answers. The Trinity Alps Wilderness spans more than 500,000 acres of rugged mountains, deep valleys, and dense forest. Every year, thousands of people hike, camp, and explore the area. Most return home safely, but some do not. According to the National Park Service and various state agencies, dozens of people disappear in wilderness areas across the United States each year. Many are eventually found. Some are never seen again. Michael and Jake Harrison are among those who vanished without explanation. Their story has become part of the unsettling catalog of missing person cases that haunt the American wilderness. The discovery of Jake's backpack and Michael's boots in June 2022 added a new chapter to their story, but it did not provide the ending that Linda and Emma desperately needed. The investigation remains open. The evidence sits in storage at the Trinity County Sheriff's Office. The location where the items were found is marked on maps, though few people know exactly where it is. The forest has reclaimed the site. The tree where the backpack hung still stands, its branches swaying in the wind, keeping whatever secrets it holds. Linda Harrison believes her husband and son are gone. She has accepted that she will likely never know exactly what happened to them, but she refuses to let their memory fade. She speaks their names, shares their photos, and tells their story to anyone who will listen. She wants the world to remember that Michael and Jake Harrison were real people with real lives, and that their disappearance left a hole that can never be filled. On quiet evenings, Linda sits in the backyard of her home and looks toward the mountains in the distance. Somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness of the Trinity Alps, are answers she may never find. The forest is silent, the mystery endures, and 2 lives, full of promise and possibility, remain lost to the shadows of the wild.